Trust in Jehovah, don't give in. Just let it go, roll it on him. You're not alone, you can pray. He hears your words, he feels your pain.
Hello there, I'm Lloyd Evans and you're watching the John Cedars channel from the bunker. And in this video, we absolutely must talk about the April JW Broadcasting episode, which was hosted by governing body helper Leonard Myers. Now, there's a lot to get through, so without further ado, let's roll the first clip.
We begin with the experience of Juan Pablo Cermeño. Notice how he found a life of real meaning and purpose.
Raymond was part of the boxing team. He was a good friend. We got along really well. He respected me, and he looked after me. After several years of being around Raymond and the other members of the team, I felt really comfortable. To some extent, I admired him because I could see he was really doing well, because Raymond was selling drugs. I knew that it wasn't right, but in time, I began to sell drugs as well. Raymond was in a drug deal gone wrong, where he was murdered. I said to myself, this could happen to me too. It had been 6 years since I had seen my mom and my siblings. My mother was studying the Bible with Jehovah's Witnesses. It helped her cope with a lot of suffering. It brought her peace. She was so happy. I began to realize that this was what I really needed. I started to study the Bible and take it seriously. I began to view Jehovah as my father because he helped me to find real relief from my pain, to have peace, a tranquility that makes you feel accepted, loved, and wanted. I have enjoyed an incredible life serving Jehovah.
Juan Pablo said it was Jehovah who gave him a life full of real meaning, purpose, and happiness. Juan Pablo is precious to Jehovah.
Juan Pablo got roped into a cult. I'm sorry, this is just your cookie-cutter testimonial where someone gets into trouble, they have a life of hardship, where they're getting involved in all sorts of dangerous stuff that clearly not all worldly people are getting into. Not all worldly people, for goodness sake, are drug dealers. Not all worldly people flee their home at the age of 9, which is what happened to Juan Pablo if you watch the whole thing. This simply isn't the experience of all worldly people, but Watchtower needs you to think, or specifically needs Jehovah's Witnesses to think, that if they venture outside of the bubble of Jehovah's organization, all this danger is there lurking and waiting to entrap and possibly even kill them. So this amounts to fear-mongering. It's a scare tactic, and it's very successful. It worked on me as a Jehovah's Witness. I was convinced that if it weren't for the fact that I'd been raised as a Jehovah's Witness, I'd probably be dead. That's how seriously I took propaganda like this. But isn't it interesting that when Juan Pablo returns to his mother, he flees home. Apparently, they were living in Mexico, I can only assume. He flees home at the age of 9, looking for a better life. Goodness knows what a 9-year-old was doing, crossing the desert and starting out on his own at that age. Apparently he had a father who was an alcoholic who he's since reconciled with. But he flees home at the age of 9, comes back age 15, having wound up with some extremely dangerous friends, one of whom we heard gets killed. And he encounters his mother, whose study of the Bible with Jehovah's Witnesses has helped her cope with suffering, has made her so happy, has given her peace, and on similarly studying the Bible, Juan Pablo finds relief from pain and tranquility. Isn't it interesting that in describing the benefits of studying the Bible with Jehovah's Witnesses and becoming Jehovah's Witnesses, they may as well be describing the sort of benefits you get from drugs? That's exactly what drugs do for many people. I mean, I'm not a drug user, apart from the odd paracetamol, but I've heard that they are used as a coping mechanism. They are used to help relieve suffering, to bring about peace, to bring relief from pain, to make people feel happy and tranquil. And ultimately, isn't that what religion does? And specifically groups like Jehovah's Witnesses, they prey on people who have dysfunctional backgrounds, who come from broken families in this case, who are struggling to cope with life's anxieties, who are perhaps going through bereavement, are having all sorts of difficulties to deal with, and they offer this miracle drug that's going to give them tranquility and peace and happiness. But like with drugs and the effect that drugs give you, none of it is real. It's just all in your mind. So even though I find this testimonial extremely obnoxious in the way it's trying to use one man's story of hardship to scare people and manipulate people, in a way, there's an analogy within this story that's actually quite prescient, because the truth is that Jehovah's Witnesses are like a drug. And as with the effect that drugs produce, the Jehovah's Witness indoctrination, although bringing temporary relief and temporary bliss, is actually addictive and does actually come at a cost.
As we mentioned, our theme for this month's program is You Are Precious to Jehovah. How vital it is that we remind ourselves of that. Why? Well, let's consider 3 reasons. First, Satan wants us to believe that Jehovah doesn't love us or value our service. He wanted Job to believe that. But that was a lie in Job's day, and it's still a lie today. A second reason that we need to be reminded that we're precious to Jehovah is because of negative circumstances or events that have taken place in our life. Severe illness, advancing years, injustices, mistreatment, a difficult family life, or other situations may cause some brothers and sisters to feel that they're just not worth loving. Some may question why Jehovah allows those things to happen. Finally, we need reminders of how Jehovah feels about us, because our imperfection can cause us to have negative thoughts. Some may still punish themselves for past mistakes, doubting that Jehovah has forgiven them or that He could ever love them. Others wage a constant battle against feelings of worthlessness. One witness wrote, Satan has done an excellent job of making even those who love Jehovah feel worthless and unlovable. I never felt worthy of Jehovah's love, so I tried to do more and more in His service as a way of earning that love. So no matter how many hours I spent in the ministry or how many people I helped, I felt it was not enough. I saw only the lack in me.
I'm sure many Jehovah's Witnesses watching this will be able to relate to that quote that Leonard is reading. To a large extent, life as a Jehovah's Witness is like being on a hamster wheel, where you're continually being told to do more, or you're under pressure to do more. But the more you do, the more you feel like you should be doing more. And of course, you never really get anywhere. You're just repeating the same stuff over and over again. More hours in the ministry, more talks from the platform, etc. no real progress is made. So it can be a very thankless life when you're in the Jehovah's Witness religion, and it doesn't surprise me that it gets to people. People start to feel worthless, as though their worship has no value because they're not doing enough, they're not trying hard enough. All I would say with regards to much of what Leonard has just been talking about is that you could apply this to almost any Christian denomination, mostly, couldn't you? If you just substitute the word Jehovah for God, God wants you to know that you're precious to him. God doesn't want you to believe Satan's lie, that you have no value in his eyes. It's a generic message, isn't it, that almost any Christian denomination could put out to their followers. Obviously, Jehovah's Witnesses consider themselves to be exclusively God's channel of communication to mankind, and they feel they have the monopoly when it comes to being God's one and only true organization. So when they say that people are precious to Jehovah, what they mean is you're precious to God so long as you worship God the way we tell you to worship God, and so long as you observe the authority of the men we're telling you God has placed in a position of authority. So there's really nothing too unusual about Leonard's talk from that respect. I just want you to pick up on what he said when he said imperfection can cause us to have negative thoughts. And this is a recurring problem with these JW broadcasting episodes, the approach that they take to mental health. So what he's saying there, if you think about it, is if you have negative thoughts, if you have dark thoughts, if you have anxiety, if you have depression, this is a result of your imperfection. And what that does is it tells someone that if they are feeling depressed, or they are feeling worthless, or stressed, or frightened, or anxious, this is their problem. This is their imperfection manifesting itself, so they need to try harder. That's what that kind of line of thinking tells someone. It's very, very harmful rhetoric to be broadcasting out to millions of Jehovah's Witnesses. And we're going to see more disturbing material related to mental health as this episode unfolds.
Not only did Jehovah see their troubles, he felt for his people, and he was moved to act in their behalf. Isaiah chapter 63, verse 9 goes on to say, "In his love and compassion, he repurchased them." Jehovah couldn't see their suffering or hear their outcries without feeling for them and doing something about it. That may remind us of the loving concern that a mother has for her newborn child. When that baby cries, the mother takes notice, and she feels for her child. In fact, notice how this is expressed at Isaiah chapter 49, verse 15. It reads, "Can a woman forget her nursing child, or have no compassion for the son of her womb? Even if these women forget, I would never forget you." It's hard to imagine a mother forgetting to nourish and care for her nursing child. That baby is helpless. Day and night it needs its mother's attention. Sad to say, however, we hear at times of such maternal neglect. But what did Jehovah say to reassure the Israelites? "I would never forget you." Yes, the tender compassion that Jehovah felt for his servants was immeasurably stronger than one of the most tender and natural feelings we can imagine. The compassion a mother normally feels for her baby.
I couldn't watch this part of Leonard's talk without thinking, as I'm sure many of you were thinking, shunning. Isn't this exactly what happens when Jehovah's Witness mothers and fathers follow through with the disfellowshipping decree? Aren't they effectively forgetting their nursing child? Okay, maybe their child isn't nursing anymore, but aren't they failing to have that basic maternal or paternal love? Aren't they forgetting it? Aren't they failing to have compassion for the son of the woman's womb? That's what shunning does. And so what Leonard's done inadvertently, even though he's using this to say, well, Jehovah's love is so much more profound than the love that a mother has for her baby, etc. All he's doing, in a way, is showing how heartless the organization that he represents is, because this is an organization that does very much make parents forget about the way they feel. And when I think about the way I feel about my children, little Jessica, who will be 6 very soon, little Julia, who's now 1, nothing, absolutely nothing will make me stop loving them, let alone forgetting them. But the same cannot be said for thousands of Jehovah's Witness parents and grandparents who at this moment are living in denial of their children and grandchildren. And sad to say, my father is one of them. And that's one thing I will take to my grave, is the fact that he wasn't able to overcome this indoctrination and what it demands of him. That he was able to forget about what it feels like to hold your child and the overwhelming feelings of love, where you think, I will sacrifice everything to keep you alive and to make sure you're safe. He was able to forget it, and he's by no means alone. Lots of you watching this will also be being shunned by your parents. And that is the type of organization we're dealing with. So thank you, Leonard, for reading to us Isaiah 49, verse 15.
Finally, let's consider a modern-day example of one who was very precious to Jehovah. It's the experience of Sister Areti Pina. Sister Pina lived on the southern coast of Albania in the town of Vlor. She was baptized in 1928 at the age of 18. There was a strong congregation in Vlor in the 1930s, and Sister Pina was a zealous evangelizer who climbed up and down rugged mountains, preaching with her Bible in hand. In time, a congregation no longer existed in Vlor, and Sister Pina lost contact with the brothers. Yet, she kept preaching faithfully on her own. Do you think her efforts went unnoticed by Jehovah? Well, years later, word reached the brothers that there was an old, senile woman who was reportedly preaching in Vlor. People thought she was crazy for keeping faith in God during years of totalitarian rule. Yet Sister Pina, now in her 80s, was anything but senile. When the brothers arrived at her home, Sister Pina invited them in, but she seemed somewhat reserved. When they explained that they were her spiritual brothers, she had no reaction. After a few minutes, Sister Pina started firing questions at the brothers. Do you believe in the Trinity? What is God's name? Do you believe in hellfire? What happens when we die? What about the earth? How many go to heaven? The brothers answered each question. Do you preach? She then asked. Yes, said one brother, we preach. But, she responded, how do you preach? We preach from house to house, replied the brother. Now I know that you are my brothers, she exclaimed. Only Jehovah's people preach from house to house. Through her tears, Sister Pina stated, Jehovah is wonderful. He never forgot me.
So there were two things that I found interesting about this story, and it will continue. We're going to hear a little bit more about Sister Arete. But the first thing I noticed was this interrogation exercise that Sister Arete put the brothers through. I'm calling them brothers. They're not my brothers, but you get what I mean. So she gets contacted by these witnesses in her 80s, and she starts bombarding them with questions. Do you believe this? Do you believe that? And only when they respond in the affirmative is she able to embrace them as brothers. Doesn't this highlight the problem with New Light? Because if Sister Arete were alive today, she would be looking at an organization that is barely recognizable from how it was 10 years ago, let alone 1928 when she got baptized. I mean, if you think about it, the faithful slave understanding that witnesses have now is only as recent as 2012. So Sister Arete could have asked these brothers, do you believe that the little flock of anointed ones are God's representatives or faithful slave on earth? And if brothers had been visiting her today, they would have had to say, no, we don't believe that, unfortunately. We believe that the governing body are God's faithful slave. And that would have been heresy compared to what she had been raised to believe. So her story, if you think about it hard enough, refutes the whole idea of New Light. How would elders explain the way the organization is to Sister Arete if they were having the same conversation now in 2020? The other thing I wanted to point out was that Sister Arete's story reminds me so much of the story of Hiro Onoda. And I did a video explaining the story of Hiro Onoda, who was a Japanese soldier who was the penultimate Japanese soldier to surrender following the defeat of the Imperial Japanese Army in World War II. I mentioned his story because it's a perfect analogy for the folly of sticking with the organization for decades and decades and decades, even though they keep getting things wrong, even though their predictions don't come to pass. Because let's remember, Sister Arete was baptized in 1928, which was only 3 years after Rutherford had predicted Armageddon would come in 1925. She would have been alive and going strong, presumably, in 1975, which was also when Jehovah's Witnesses predicted Armageddon to come. She would presumably have been alive during the generation teaching that I grew up with, whereby it was said that those who were old enough to witness the events of 1914 and understand them would not die off before Armageddon came. You've had prediction after prediction after prediction. At some point, you need to be able to identify if you're being conned, if you're being lied to. And surely a basic measure of that, according to the scripture in Deuteronomy that I cited in my very first ever video, surely a basic measure of that is a group of people who keep making predictions in God's name, and these predictions never turn out to be true. Think about what happened to Hiro Onoda. He was serving in the Japanese army, he was fighting in the Philippines, and he never heard that his army had surrendered. They found him in the 1970s in the jungle, still in his uniform, still thinking that he was at war. And they had to fly out his superior officer because he wouldn't believe when people approached him and said, the war ended quite a long time ago. He wouldn't believe. He thought they were lying to him. So they had to fly out his superior officer, who happened to still be alive, and they had to go through a formal ceremony of relieving him of duty before he finally handed over his sword and all that kind of thing. What's the difference with Sister Arete? It's the same situation. She's there fighting for, you could say, God's kingdom. Decades after, it's been proven to be just a fantasy that was dreamt up by Rutherford. Rutherford dies, replaced by a new president. Nor dies, the governing body takes over. Just successive leaders, all with dubious theology and failed predictions attached to their leadership. And she's just barreling on as though it's all true. And this is the folly of spending years or decades attached to an organization that keeps getting it wrong. At some point, you have to take a step back and think, do I really want to be like Hiro Onoda? Do I really want to be in my old age when I'm found wandering around aimlessly and I finally realize, the penny finally drops and I realize that I'm under the spell of a very strong delusion and that I've been wasting years and years of my life? It's definitely worth thinking about if you are a witness.
Sometime later, the brothers were notified that Sister Pina was ill and that she wanted to meet with one of the responsible brothers. When he arrived, she asked in part, as she gasped for air, "Has the book of Revelation been fulfilled?" The brother responded, "Yes, Arete, most of it has." Sister Pina said, "Now I can die in peace. I needed to know how close we are." Shortly after that conversation, Sister Pina faithfully finished her earthly course. What do you think? During all those years of isolation from the earthly part of Jehovah's organization, did Sister Pina's efforts go unnoticed by Jehovah? Absolutely not. Just imagine Jehovah's joy as he watched her faithfully doing what she could in his service. Do you think that Sister Pina was precious to Jehovah? Without a doubt she was. Well, your efforts in Jehovah's service do not go unnoticed by him either. Like Sister Pina, you are precious to him.
Just imagine Jehovah's joy as he watched her faithfully doing what she could in his service. We're going to find out as this episode progresses that a lot of being a witness is down to imagination. You're expected to imagine quite a lot without having any evidence whatsoever. That's what it's all about, just having faith. And if your beliefs are based on faith or imagination, whatever you want to call it, wish thinking, what's stopping you from joining more or less any faith? That would be my question. And how sad, how tragic that Sister Arete Pina ends her life being lied to. Specific question, has Revelation been fulfilled yet? Well, yes. Asterisk. Most of it has. Most of it has. I don't know when she died, by the way. I tried doing research into this, and it's a little bit vague as to exactly what year she died. This experience was printed both in the 2010 yearbook and in a 2005 Watchtower article. Watchtower clearly very proud of this experience. Now it's making its third iteration in the form of a JW Broadcasting episode. So Watchtower recycling it repeatedly, you could say, for propaganda value. But they don't give the exact year, and I can only imagine that it would have been perhaps in the 1990s when she died. And she died thinking that she was a member of the faithful slave. And she died being lied to by an elder. that the book of Revelation had been fulfilled, even though the Revelation climax book, as we all know, is pretty much obsolete. We're waiting and waiting and waiting for the organization to print an updated version of it. But let's face it, how many pages of it have been reimagined in the theology? We heard one example in the 2019 annual meeting where David Splain said that the locusts of Revelation and the locusts of Joel are not the same, because apparently it's taken 100 years for the faithful slave to learn to read prophetic Bible verses in context. So that's one change, that's one update that they're going to have to give to the Revelation Climax book. But let's face it, there will be many, many more. And for Sister Aretti to be lied to on her deathbed and told, yes, Revelation's more or less been fulfilled. Sorry, it hasn't. It just hasn't. Where's the burning mountain falling into the sea? Where's the sea turning red? Where are the bowls of wrath and the trumpet blasts? And all of this, of course, is explained as somehow relating to the activities of the John class or the Bible students in the early 20th century. But that's just all make-believe, isn't it? She lived her life following make-believe, and she received an extra dose of it in her final minutes of life. And that, for me, is not a story for Watchtower to be proud of. It's a tragedy.
My name is Malumak. No one can imagine how much Jehovah has helped me. I was raised in Sisimiut in Greenland. My childhood was wonderful. We were very often out in nature. In the summer we sailed, and in the winter we rode dog sledge, and we went hunting and fishing. When I was a child, I was very close to my parents. I was a daddy's girl. He called me my beloved, so beloved became my nickname. It has been so wonderful to be raised in the truth. The greatest gift that I could get is to know Jehovah through them. When I was 9 years old, my parents got divorced. It was terrible. I saw how my siblings were hurt. It cannot be explained how, we were very wounded in our hearts. When my parents divorced, my father was disfellowshipped. It was very hard to be separated like that. I missed my dad a lot. When my mom started to drink, I also felt abandoned. Because I knew what she had been doing, I was not surprised when after some time she was disfellowshipped. But of course I felt very hurt and sad. I supplicated Jehovah to help me stay in the truth. The pioneer sister that studied with me helped me a lot. She studied with me, sometimes took me on the ministry, and invited me to dinner. When I was about 12 years old, my father came back into the truth. I was very happy that it finally happened. I began to have a good relationship with him again. We sailed a lot, drove snowmobile, and rode dog sledge, and my father and I watched movies in the evening. I remember that when my dad heard that I was going to be baptized, he shed a tear, and I could see he was proud.
This is a messed up story. Just spoiler alert. You can see a clue as to where this is going just in those final few seconds, where you see the pain etched on Malumag's face when she describes her father. But there's already so many things to talk about just in those opening couple of minutes. First of all, notice that a pioneer sister is studying with Malumag in place of her parents. So her father's disfellowshipped, her mother ends up also getting disfellowshipped, and somehow witnesses maintain a presence in that family, in her life, so that even though she's a minor, she's still being indoctrinated by her local Jehovah's Witness congregation. Remember what was said by Shane Brady at the ICSA hearings. Repeatedly, he lied to ICSA, saying that Jehovah's Witnesses do not have any activities that separate children from their parents. What the hell have we just seen there? Malumag, separated from her parents, studying with a pioneer sister who has been instructed to conduct that study by elders in the local congregation. And yet Shane Brady has the cheek to stand before ICSA and say, oh, children are never separated from their parents in Jehovah's Witness worship. And then the very next month, they release a JW Broadcasting episode showing precisely that happening. So that was a big standout for me. Also, just the fact that when Malumag is talking about her family and her childhood, the positives are always connected to things that are entirely unrelated to Jehovah's Witness worship. We went sailing. We went dog sledding. They even open up and, in fact, close the testimonial with drone footage of her kayaking next to icebergs, which, you know, fantastic visuals, isn't it? Beautiful, gorgeous cinematography, you could say, showing her enjoying life. But that's not the reality of Jehovah's Witness life. If she were to spend every day doing that, or maybe even do that every week, questions would be asked as to whether she's really spending all her time in Jehovah's service. Is she allowing recreation to overwhelm her service of Jehovah? But it works nice for a Jehovah's Witness propaganda testimonial. So let's have her in her kayak going past the icebergs. I don't blame the producers of this for capitalizing on the geography of where Malumag is and the gorgeous landscapes of Greenland and the fact that she knew how to sail. But she knew how to sail because arguably her family weren't having a typical Jehovah's Witness experience in her early years, and she was deriving a lot of joy and happiness from activities that were entirely unconnected to Jehovah's Witness worship, going out on dog sleds and going sailing. And you have to wonder to what extent the pressures of being in the Jehovah's Witness religion ended up having, if anything, a negative impact on Malumag's life.
When I was 15 years old, my world fell to pieces. My father committed suicide. It's difficult to describe that my father was suddenly gone. I can't understand why he would do such a selfish thing. I missed him a lot. It was like my heart was stabbed. I was also very angry at him.
So this is what I was referring to earlier when I was talking about very inappropriate material in the context of mental health. Malumag is well within her rights to personally interpret her father's suicide as quote-unquote selfish. But the way this testimonial is presented offers no pushback on that. And the reason why there is no pushback, the reason why Leonard won't get on camera and say, of course, we're not saying that people who commit suicide are selfish, is because, frankly, that is what the organisation thinks. That's why they're leaving this in. That's why it will go unchallenged, because this is the perception among Jehovah's Witnesses, that suicide is a selfish act and borderline, well, actually not even borderline, it's a sin. It's self-murder. That's been the attitude towards suicide for years. And interestingly, the Shepherd book, if I just get my copy for you, chapter 12 of the Shepherd book has a whole list of things that witnesses can be judicially processed for, of things that would require a judicial committee to be formed. And if you look at the very last item in chapter 12 of the Shepherd book, the heading is attempted suicide. And it says, a suicide attempt may be the result of deep despair or major depression. Elders should deal carefully and compassionately with such a person. In most cases, a judicial hearing is not required. And I've put in my notes, in some cases it will. So at the very best, it's a grey area for Jehovah's Witness elders as to whether someone is sinning when they attempt suicide, or in the case of Malumag's father, succeed in their attempt. And that's why Malumag is here on camera saying that her father was selfish. And as I said, there will be no pushback to these remarks. There will be no perspective or context added, no responsible advice that might have come from secular sources on mental health, because this is falling in line with Watchtower's narrative that you're selfish if you commit suicide. What an appalling thing to say. When darkness drives people to that point, the last thing they need is this sort of stigma attached to their actions. If someone feels like they just can't carry on, the last thing they need is to be shamed in this way by this sort of thinking. Again, I don't blame Malumag. She's entitled to interpret her father's actions in the way she has interpreted them. But it must just be said that the lens through which she is viewing her father's actions is that of a Jehovah's Witness, is that of someone who has been indoctrinated by Jehovah's Witnesses as a minor by non-family members at the instruction of elders, as far as we can tell.
I wrote a lot. And I wrote many letters to my father about things I wanted to tell him. I also cried out to Jehovah in long prayers. I love Psalm 34:18 about Jehovah being close to those who are crushed in spirit. That was how I felt, and the thought that Jehovah is close to them comforts me a lot. I also did all I could to go to all the meetings, even when I didn't want to see anyone. Even if I'd cried before the meeting, I went anyway. 1 month after my father's death, I got baptized. I got baptized because I loved Jehovah.
Presumably you'll have noticed the timeline here. She tells us that she got baptized 1 month after her father's death. She has this conversation with her father. Her father sheds a tear which she interprets to be a tear of pride.
I remember that when my dad heard that I was going to be baptized, he shed a tear, and I could see he was proud.
And within a short period, I don't know how long, but within a short period, her father commits suicide. We'll never know the reason I mean, even if there was a suicide note, I doubt they're going to show it on JW Broadcasting. I'm not even sure they should show it. But I would love to be able to talk to Malumag's father. I'd love to have been able to hear his side of the story. And I'd especially like to know whether that tear really was a tear of pride and not a tear of despair.
When I was 9 years old, I had promised Jehovah to serve him for the rest of my life. My relationship with my mother is much better now. It is great to serve Jehovah together with her now. We preach together every Sunday, and I always look forward to going on the ministry together with her. When I was 18 years old, I began to help in the remote translation office. Later, I started pioneering. I have always learned a lot from King David. No matter what circumstance he faced, whether bad or good, he used them to draw close to Jehovah. Jehovah has helped me to overcome challenges through the congregation, giving me power beyond what is normal, taking me in as his daughter.
As a child, Malu's nickname was Beloved. Yet, for a while, she felt anything but loved. She said her world fell to pieces. Have you ever felt that way? Remember what helped Malu stay close to Jehovah. A pioneer sister encouraged her. Personal study reminded Malu that Jehovah helped his servants in the past. She pursued spiritual goals such as auxiliary pioneering. And she went to as many Christian meetings as she could, even when she wanted to be alone. In all these ways, Malu was reminded that she is precious to Jehovah. As she said, Jehovah has taken me in as his daughter.
I'm going to say it, I think this is a very dubious story for Watchtower to include in its JW Broadcasting episode. I don't see how this is a positive. I think this shows the organisation at its very worst. This is an organisation that will take a child and indoctrinate that child even without the involvement of the child's parents. I mean, presumably one or both of them gave permission. But when Leonard is saying that a pioneer sister helped Malu, what he really means is a pioneer sister indoctrinated a child into the Jehovah's Witness religion. You have this deeply troubling timeline of Malumag or Malu, however you want to call her, having this conversation with her father about her getting baptized, her father shedding a tear, and then committing suicide not long after. That doesn't sit well with me at all. And to make matters worse, you have Malu, again without any pushback from the organisation, saying that her father's suicide was an act of selfishness. No amount of gorgeous drone footage of icebergs and Malu going around in her kayak can make this story a positive one. I'm sorry.
For some people, staying busy may seem like the right thing to do when they've suffered a serious setback. Does staying busy really help? Let's find out in this dramatization.
I, Stephen, take you, Emily, to be my wedded wife.
I, Emily, take you, Stephen, to be my wedded husband.
I had no doubt our vows were forever. Nothing could have prepared me for the heartbreak. I never expected her to be unfaithful and unwilling to work things out. I felt humiliated. How could she do such a thing? I was embarrassed, and I didn't want to talk to anyone. I read somewhere that time would help me heal, and just to stay busy. It seemed to work, but I was constantly reminded of what I lost. Our spiritual goals, the hopes and dreams we had, all destroyed.
I was constantly reminded of what I lost. Our spiritual goals, the hopes and dreams we had, all destroyed. It's not about him losing his wife after 10 years of marriage. And I'm told that going through a divorce is one of the most stressful, if not the most stressful things a person can go through, by the way. So it's not to be underestimated what someone in this situation is going through. But here, the focus has to always be on Watchtower. Oh, this person no longer has an opportunity to serve the organization, to serve Jehovah alongside his wife. That's what all this is about. Who's he going to serve Jehovah with now? Who's going to help him with his spiritual goals? That's the focus. And you'll notice that he reads somewhere. Obviously, none of this is real, but it would have been nice to know where he read it. He reads somewhere that time is a healer, and all he needs to do is stay busy. And that turns out to be the moral of the story from the organization's perspective, that yes, you do need to stay busy, but it's important how you stay busy and in what ways you stay busy. And perhaps predictably, the solution ends up being, yes, you need to stay busy, but you need to stay busy in Jehovah's service. You need to do all of the things that the organization expects of you, and that's the path to overcoming the tragedy of a divorce.
I didn't want to dwell on the hurt, but I just couldn't ignore it. Was I really coping? Or was I leaving myself open to even more pain?
So, brothers and sisters, we're going to talk about marriage today.
This was very strange. I don't really understand the point of this scene. He's in a clothes shop. The shop assistant kind of looks at him as though she's kind of checking him out. I don't know. Maybe she's just being friendly. It's hard to tell with such bad acting. But I don't understand the purpose of the scene. Is this what he means when he says, maybe I was just leaving myself open to even more pain? In other words, getting involved with a non-witness would produce more pain in your life. What you need to be doing is not satiating your material desires by going clothes shopping. What you need to be doing is applying yourself to Jehovah's service. You need to get to the Kingdom Hall. You need to get out preaching from door to door, and that's what's going to safeguard you. That's what's going to protect you long term.
Ephesians chapter 5.
I was angry, but not just with Emily. I was angry with everything.
Steven. Hey, let me stop by tomorrow.
What I had to say, I wouldn't have blamed Tom for judging me, but he didn't.
You're right, Steven. I can't understand how you feel, but you know who can. Do you remember Psalm 34? I think verse 18 says it best. Can you read it for us?
Jehovah is close to the brokenhearted. He saves those who are crushed in spirit.
Isn't that beautiful, Scripture? Take advantage of Jehovah being that close to you and include him in everything.
Jehovah is a loving shepherd. When we hurt, he cares. I knew this, but in a way, I'd forgotten. I realized I hadn't included Jehovah in the ways I tried to cope. Staying busy was important, but I needed to draw closer to God, not push away. And when I did, the real healing began. Even though the pain is still there, Jehovah sees the tears. Jehovah feels what I feel. It is getting better. Slowly. Because Jehovah is close to the brokenhearted.
See your wonders and I sing to you. I see your wonders and I sing to you. I sing to you.
So, it's a happily ever after ending. They're all there, playing the guitar and singing, just to strengthen their allegiance to the organisation. But gosh, what a cringeworthy dramatisation. And for me, it all centres around this line: I hadn't included Jehovah in the ways I tried to cope. Apparently, you can't cope with tragedy. You can't cope with divorce. You can't cope with bereavement. You can't cope with anything bad happening to you unless you include Jehovah. Which would prompt me to ask the question, well, what about all of the people who aren't Jehovah's Witnesses who have to cope? Of course they have to move on from divorces or deaths or whatever. And you meet them and clearly they have managed to move on. So if they're doing that, even though they're not Jehovah's Witnesses, does this not mean that witnesses are being lied to here? You can move on without making your life completely rotate around what the governing body wants you to do to serve them.
The vast majority of marriages among Jehovah's people prosper because Christian husbands and wives apply Bible principles. But a few fail to live up to their marriage commitment. Are you among the brokenhearted? If so, never forget that you are precious to Jehovah.
If this was a statement on Wikipedia, the majority of marriages among Jehovah's Witnesses prosper, you need the little in brackets source needed. Where's the source? Where's the proof, Leonard, that what you're saying is true? You're saying this in a JW Broadcasting episode where you've shown a testimonial from Greenland where a Jehovah's Witness couple go through marriage difficulties where they end up getting divorced.
When I was 9 years old, my parents got divorced.
You've literally shown a story in this episode that contradicts your statement. So what you're making at this point is an extraordinary claim that the majority of marriages prosper, and extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Will we see this evidence? No.
Prayer is one of the most powerful ways Jehovah helps us. We'll see that in our new music video.
When I called yesterday, I could tell you lost your way. Be assured you are loved by our God up above. Trust in Jehovah, don't give in. Just let it go. Roll it on him. You're not alone. You can pray. He hears your words. He feels your pain. Don't keep that burden in. Roll it on him. Whoa. Roll it on him. Yeah. Roll it on him.
What a beautiful reminder that we can go to Jehovah in prayer at any time and express our deepest feelings to him. As the song says, don't keep that burden in. Roll it on him.
Again, Jehovah's Witnesses don't have the monopoly on praying. Lots of Christian denominations do it. If you're going to tell them that God isn't listening to their prayers, but is listening to the prayers of Jehovah's Witnesses, again, you're making an extraordinary claim, and extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. But of course, this is just a bog standard JW Broadcasting propaganda video. They're not interested in showing evidence. They're only interested in manipulating witnesses through emotional material, this song being one example. And I will just say that, look, a lot of these songs are just totally cringeworthy. In fact, all of them are cringeworthy in terms of their lyrics, but the music does tend to vary. You get some music videos where the music is just really, really bad or really embarrassing. This is actually quite well done in terms of the music. And I actually am starting to notice the same voices popping up in music video after music video. It seems that they have like a go-to male vocalist for kind of hip, contemporary style music videos, and a go-to female vocalist. And if I may just offer this observation, it sounded a little awkward in this music video. If you watch the whole thing, she has someone else harmonizing with her. Maybe it's her on another track. She has another female voice harmonizing with her. And then towards the end, the go-to male vocalist is harmonizing with her. And it just sounds odd. Like you wouldn't have that in a contemporary pop song, a female singer having a male vocalist harmonizing, unless it was a duet, and this isn't a duet, it's the female vocalist's songs.
Roll it on him. Whoa. Roll it on him. Yeah. Roll it on him. Whoa. Roll it on him. Yeah.
It's almost as though they can't just have a female vocalist without some kind of male influence in the production, but maybe I'm just being overly critical. It's just an observation I wanted to share with you.
Sometimes I think all of us would agree that it's easy to see Jehovah's hand when things are going well, when we get a court victory, when someone's health improves, or maybe when someone really asks to come to study the Bible with us and they're at our meetings. But it's harder to see Jehovah's hand when we see bad things happen, either to us or our brothers and sisters. So we may wonder, how can we see Jehovah's hand when bad things are happening? Well, you can see my hand right now, right? But if I put it away, you can't see it. Now, do you assume because you can't see my hand that I don't have a hand anymore and that it's not? Well, no, you reason on the fact that you see the rest of me and there's probably still my hand attached. So likewise, there are times when it's easy to see Jehovah's hand, and there are other times when we have to reason on what we know about Jehovah in order to see his hand in action.
This was a fascinating little cameo by John Ekron in this morning worship segment. If I had to choose a title for his talk, it would be A Celebration of Confirmation Bias. That's what he's basically presenting. And I've done a song about this, which probably some of you will be thinking of who've seen the song. But I wrote a song a number of years ago now called Good Things, Bad Things.
I saw it in the yearbook, we've grown by 2%. This proved Jehovah's Witnesses are truly heaven sent. And if the numbers start to fall, there is no need to scoff. The love of the greater number is expected to cool off.
And it's basically making fun of the fact that when good things happen in the Jehovah's Witness religion, Jehovah's Witnesses immediately point to it as evidence of their beliefs. And then when bad things happen, they also are able to find reasons why this is also proof that their beliefs are true. It's basically confirmation bias. And if you look up the Wikipedia article on confirmation bias, let me just read you the first paragraph. Confirmation bias is the tendency to search for, interpret, favor, and recall information in a way that confirms or strengthens one's prior personal beliefs or hypotheses. It is a type of cognitive bias. People display this bias when they gather or remember information selectively, or when they interpret it in a biased way. This is a faulty method of arriving at truth. So when good things are happening in the organization, oh, we're winning court victories, my question would be, what about the court victories that you've lost? If you're going to tell us that Jehovah is blessing the organization because he's given you this victory in this land where, well, let's say in Korea, where young witness men are no longer going to be incarcerated for conscientious objection, how do you then interpret the A versus Watchtower case in the UK, where Watchtower lost a civil lawsuit and were found vicariously liable for the sexual abuse of a child? You can't have it both ways. You can't just single out good things and say, ha, proof that I have the truth, and ignore all of the contradicting evidence. But that's what John Ekron's talk is about. And he jumps right out of the gate by insulting everyone's intelligence with this awful analogy where he says, you know, if I put my hand in front of you, you can all confirm that I have a hand, but if I put my hand down and it's out of eyesight, you don't reason that I no longer have a hand just because you can't see it. Well, it's just like that with Jehovah's hand. Just because it's not always evident through favorable things that are happening doesn't mean his hand isn't still there and acting in various ways. And that's, again, insulting everyone's intelligence. It's basically telling Jehovah's Witnesses to believe based on nothing, to believe based, well, on faith, on wish thinking. It goes back to what I was saying earlier. If you're not in the business of basing your beliefs on evidence, you may as well believe any religion. You need to be able to establish whether what you're being told is true or not. And if it's just going to be this cup and ball trick, where, oh, now my hand's here and now my hand's not here, guess where my hand is? Chances are someone's trying to fool you.
Now, how does Jehovah stay happy seeing all the bad things that are happening? Maybe you've wondered that. I know it's crossed my mind. How does Jehovah stay happy when he sees all the suffering that's going on? And frankly, he sees all the suffering. He sees everything going on. I know how I feel, and you probably know how you feel, just when you read about what's happening to our brothers in Venezuela or in Russia, or with all of the hurricanes and earthquakes that we've had in recent times. And we see the suffering, not only of our brothers and sisters, but of other people. And we consider, how can Jehovah stay happy when he knows all of what is happening? Well, let's consider three, I'm sure, of many reasons why Jehovah can stay happy, even though he knows all the suffering, and then we can see how that could benefit us as well. First of all, his hand is hard at work preparing the new world for us. Jeremiah 29:11, he says, "For I well know the thoughts that I am thinking toward you, declares Jehovah, thoughts of peace and not of calamity, to give you a future and a hope." So Jehovah's not simply just watching events occur. He's actively working on the solution. He, along with Jesus and the heavenly angels, are working hard on the kingdom. Now, we can't see into heaven right now, but I want you to just imagine all the activity of the angels, the resurrected anointed brothers, Jesus, working hard on making preparations for Armageddon and the new world. Just think of all the work we're doing just to prepare for the annual meeting and dedication. Can you imagine all the work going on in heaven that is there? I mean, how far along are the new scrolls? How are basic needs as far as clean water, food, and homes going to be provided for the survivors? So while we can't see into heaven, we know that his hand is there. So Jehovah's happy because he's actively working right now to make things better for us. What lesson for us? We can be happy when we see the suffering around us because we know what Jehovah and our brothers are doing up there to prepare for the new world.
What John Ekron has just said is quite frankly worthy of a video all by itself. That is one of the very worst explanations I've ever heard for the allowance of suffering in the world. Because what it all amounts to is just use your imagination. When you see bad things happening, when you see suffering, when you see injustice, just think really, really hard about God doing something positive and God having a plan, and then it will all make total sense. I'm not kidding. That's what he's just said. Use your imagination. He's probably in heaven at his planning table, planning Armageddon, planning how he's going to slaughter 7.5 billion men, women, and children, and then planning the new scrolls. If you're interested, the new scrolls refers to a scripture that witnesses believe is talking about basically an extension to the Bible that will be released in the paradise, telling witnesses how to administer the kingdom on the earth. So that's what he means by new scrolls. Jehovah's busy arranging for the new scrolls. He's planning how the Armageddon survivors, how the 8 million or so who've made it through the biggest act of genocide the universe will ever have seen. He's planning how they're going to have clean water and food and somewhere to sleep during the initial years of the new system, when they're going to be very preoccupied concealing the evidence of this genocide. He's planning all of this. Just use your imagination. Any religion could say this. Any religion could use that sort of reasoning. Just because you can't see Jehovah's hand doesn't mean it's not there. Just imagine what it might be doing. I think I don't need to imagine. I'm pretty sure there isn't a hand there or here or anywhere, because it's just a made-up story that you are telling people in order to control them.
We could kind of illustrate the way Jehovah feels by thinking about parents and how they deal with a small child. You ever seen a small child, maybe 2, 3 years of age, and they really fall badly and scrape their knees badly, and they are screaming in pain? There's this red liquid leaking out of them. They are distraught. In fact, in that child's mind, he may think this is the end of it. This is end of life as I know it. I'm never going to recover from this. I'm going to die. But the parent, of course, their perspective is different, isn't it? But they comfort the child. They help to take care of the skinned knee. They comfort them, and they tell them, you're going to live. It's going to be okay. It's going to be all right. And why can the parent have that view? Because they know in a few hours, maybe, at least in a week or so, child's not even going to remember that skinned knee. It's going to be just a very distant memory. Well, see, Jehovah also knows that whatever we're going through right now, whatever suffering we may be going through now, that soon in that new world, we aren't going to recall that suffering. And he knows that he can solve any problem we're facing as easily as we heal from a scraped knee. He knows our whole eternal lives are ahead of us. So he comforts us, he listens to our heartfelt prayers, and like a kind parent, he's telling us through our brothers, the Bible, and Holy Spirit, you will live.
With every new line of argumentation he presents, it just gets worse and worse. And he continues to insult our intelligence. What he's essentially saying here is, well, who are you to question God anyway? Because you're just a puny human. You're like a child compared to a parent who knows everything, who has experience, who can see the bigger picture, who's lived for longer than you. You are a baby. You are a child compared to God. So what makes you think you even get to ask the question, why does God permit suffering? Who do you think you are to ask that? It's like asking a parent when your wound's going to heal. And I found that hilarious. The child falls over and there's red fluid coming out of his leg. Do you mean blood, John? Is that what you're referring to? I'd be interested to see a script for Grey's Anatomy that's written by John Ekron. What's the status of this patient? He has red fluid coming out of him. Lots of red fluid. No, it's just a really, really bad and frankly patronizing and condescending line of reasoning that he is pushing on witnesses here. First of all, he says, well, use your imagination, just pretend God's doing something. And then he says, and anyway, who do you think you are to ask the question to begin with? You're a child, and we're going to treat you like a child because God knows everything, so you don't get to ask about suffering, just deal with it.
See, Jehovah is waiting patiently for the complete vindication of his sovereignty. I really love what the June 2017 Watchtower article, Keep Your Eyes on the Big Issue, said. Let us not become so absorbed in our own lives that we lose sight of the big issue, the vindication of Jehovah's sovereignty. And let us appreciate that our role in this vital issue entails remaining faithful even under difficult circumstances. Isn't that a beautiful quote to think about? See, Jehovah knows that by his being patient now, he and all his faithful servants will never have to go through this again. The issue of sovereignty will be completely settled. I mean, don't you admire Jehovah's patience? I mean, to watch all that is happening and to have the self-control to wait for the appointed time is truly an example of patience in action. You know, when we think about the different situations our brothers and sisters and others face, when a mother, for example, watches a handicapped son struggle to walk or to talk, or a husband watches his wife struggle to breathe, you know, we want so much at that moment to press that big red start the new world button now. But when you have that feeling, remember our text for today. The hand of Jehovah will become known to his servants. What lesson for us? We need to be patient and keep our eyes on the big issue of Jehovah's sovereignty.
That's his third argument. So we started off with use your imagination. We moved on to anyway, you're a child or a baby. Who do you think you are? Questioning God. It's like a child complaining to their parents about a bruised or cut knee. And we end up with John Ekron effectively saying, just be patient, just wait, will you? It's going to happen eventually. This is all about God's sovereignty. So your needs and your questions and your doubts are quite frankly irrelevant compared to the main issue, the big picture of God's sovereignty. So in attempting to answer the question, that he started out with, and he chose the question, by the way. He started out with the question, effectively, of why does God permit suffering? And his answer is, don't think about the question. Who do you think you are to think about the question? Just be patient. Use your imagination. That is not an answer to the question of why does God permit suffering? And I found this whole morning worship fascinating from that perspective, because again, no one forced John Eckren to answer this question, but he took it on anyway and failed abysmally to provide anything approaching a compelling answer.
Every year, millions of people come together at our conventions to learn about Jehovah and encourage each other. Starting next month, Always Rejoice conventions will be held all over the earth. Jehovah's Witnesses will be actively inviting their neighbors, workmates, schoolmates, and all interested ones to join us. What effect can receiving an invitation have on a person's life? Let's watch the following report.
In 2016, I received an invitation from my son to attend the Convention of Jehovah's Witnesses. He was getting baptized at that convention, and it was important to him for me to be there, and so he asked me to go. Even though I was very active in another religion for 30 years, I went in order to please him.
I learned the truth after I supplicated God with all my strength, because I was really lost. I asked for answers to questions that were yet unanswered, and God answered me. Jehovah gave me the answer to my prayers when I found this. This invitation, deliverance at hand, was the answer to my prayers.
Arriving there at that convention, I observed the crowd, many people, starting right at the parking lot. Everything organized, people entering in an orderly manner. Inside the assembly hall, everyone was very organized, well-dressed, very loving. And when the convention began, I saw such spiritual food that I had never seen in my religion. 30 years in a religion, I thought I knew a lot, but I didn't know anything. So I decided to study.
When I arrived at the convention, I started watching the people. Their faces were smiley. They seemed to be happy. There were men, women, and children from different races and nationalities. When they sang, I could sense their true joy and unity.
So obviously this clip hasn't aged well because they're telling us that the conventions are going to begin in May, and as you'll have seen in my recent video, due to the current pandemic, that is no longer happening. Physical conventions have been cancelled completely. Instead, they're going to release a number of videos in July and August. So the whole convention basically is moving on to JW Broadcasting, and witnesses will be expected to sit through the convention in their homes or in small groups. So those are the revised instructions to Jehovah's Witnesses. But I couldn't help but cringe at these kind of quick-fire testimonials about witnesses who have become witnesses by accepting an invitation to go to the convention. I would just ask you to re-watch that segment. You can watch the whole thing in the actual JW Broadcasting episode for completeness, or just watch those few seconds and try to find a compelling reason to join a religion. If you're going to join a religion, I would submit the reason should be very simple. Because it's the truth. Because it's been proven to me that this religion is the truth. And here is the proof that I was shown. This is what convinced me. That's not what we hear. We hear a mother talking about going along to the convention to make her son happy. That's not a reason to join a religion. Oh, and when I went, it was so well organized. Everyone was well dressed and they were so loving. That's not a reason to join a religion. In fact, the more you're love bombed and the more you're surrounded by uniformity, the more there should be red flags that this might be a cult, I would suggest. The more well-organized things are, the more I would be asking, whoa, hang on, who is organizing this? Who is pulling the strings? Who is making everyone dress like this? Who is insisting that men don't have beards? I want answers. But instead, apparently, no, this is a reason to join the religion. The guy says, their faces were smiley. I'm going to join this religion because guess what? Everyone's smiling. Not a reason to join a religion. If that's your reason, you can join more or less any religion. You'll find people smiling, I promise you. Go to your local church, present yourself as someone who's just passing through and just interested. I guarantee you, you will be love bombed. In almost any church, that's bound to happen because people want you to join. People want to see their group expanding and growing and new people coming in. People want new blood. People want to see new faces. They want to feel as though their movement is going somewhere. Of course you're going to be love bombed. This is not a reason to join the religion. So I found it fascinating that even in this short segment, we're told everything we need to know about just how credible and just how compelling Jehovah's Witness beliefs are, because even when they're pitching them directly, they can't give any good reasons. All they can say is, come along to our conventions, everyone's going to be well dressed, and people will smile at you.
Let's conclude our program by visiting our brothers and sisters in Cuba. The Republic of Cuba is a chain of 1,600 islands and islets at the intersection of the Atlantic Ocean, the Caribbean Sea, and the Gulf of Mexico. Cuba itself is by far the largest island in the chain, with one major city, Havana. Many are embracing the truth. The Este de Viñales congregation is located in this part of Cuba. Here, 128 publishers conduct 275 Bible studies. Because of its vast territory, the congregation has 3 groups. One group that has only 7 publishers had 75 people attend last year's memorial. To cover their territory, the brothers travel long distances, sometimes by bicycle or motorcycle.
So my question here is, what the hell is going on in Cuba? Because when I was watching it the first time, I heard the part where he says, many are embracing the truth.
Many are embracing the truth.
And I thought, hang on a minute, because many of you will remember I've done videos about the 2019 service report and the fact that a number of countries in that report, including Canada and various other countries, including half of Europe, are in decline in terms of the number of peak publishers. And Cuba was stuck in my mind from doing that research. So I went back, I looked at the service report figures for 2019 and compared them with 2018. In 2018, the peak publishers for Cuba were 95,031. In 2019, the peak publishers were 94,873. So there are 158 fewer peak publishers in Cuba as of the latest reporting year, 2019, than there were the previous year. And yet, Leonard is here saying,
many are embracing the truth.
Are you lying to us, Leonard? Because the numbers your organization is publishing would indicate that even if there are many who are getting baptized, this is being offset by people leaving. Now, he goes on to describe a congregation with 128 publishers having 275 Bible studies. So that's more than 2 Bible studies per publisher. He describes another congregation where there was this massive memorial attendance. Okay, well, that could have happened. It could also be completely made up. But if it did happen, my question would be, how are you having so much interest in at least some parts of Cuba, and yet the country is still shrinking, or has shrunk in the latest figures by 158 peak publishers? Something's happening there, and we're not getting the full story. So it's just worthwhile putting a flag there that when you get these reports, they bombard you with information, but it's very selectively chosen information, and they don't always give you the full picture. If you're going to pick out Cuba and you're going to tell us many are embracing the truth in Cuba, you then need to explain why the numbers are fewer for 2019. So just something to bring to your attention there. But there's been a lot to talk about. And for me, the highlights or lowlights, I guess you could say, were the story of Malumag. That was very disturbing. I was watching that and it genuinely rattled me that, first of all, this girl has been exploited. I mean, she gets baptized young, having been, again, indoctrinated by a pioneer, apparently, we can only assume at the direction of the local elders. And she's, by the age of 18, working in the RTO, which is the Remote Translation Office. 18. She's there working in what is effectively the Sea Org for Watchtower. She's there as a Bethelite, effectively, in the RTO doing translation work for Watchtower. 18 is no age, is it, to be committing your life to the organisation. And she's minus a father for reasons that are unknown. But again, I would really love to hear what her father's side of the story was. We're hearing her side. I want to know what was really going through his mind when he shed that tear so soon before he ended up committing suicide after learning that his daughter was getting baptized. So tragic. And yet Watchtower seems to think that this is a positive story for witnesses to dwell on. And if I'm honest, I was also fascinated by John Ekron's turn in front of the camera, his celebration of confirmation bias, and the appalling reasons he gave for witnesses to ignore evidence that's staring them in the face, that even if a God does exist, he's certainly not backing this organisation. Or if he is backing this organisation, he's doing it in a very peculiar way and sending out mixed messages. And you could say hanging children out to dry by influencing the leadership to have policies in place that really do serve to endanger children. So a number of things worth talking about. Let me know what you think in the comments below, but that's pretty much everything I've got for you for the April JW Broadcasting episode. Don't forget to subscribe to the John Cedars channel for more such videos. And as always, thank you for watching.
Oh, it's